come what may, I'm headed down the right path. I feel so brave, my head held high and I'm showing class. Dreams ignited, every day I truly give my best. I'm thriving excitedly to be the very best version of myself. I'm so bold and I'm so brilliant. I feel amazing, I feel so resilient. I'm so bold and I'm so brilliant. Feel so amazing, I feel so resilient.
Everyone, welcome to the Chundria Brownlow Show, where powerful stories meet real conversations. I'm your host, Dr. Chundria Brownlow, and today's episode is one of those deeply meaningful ones that speak to both the heart and the spirit. Let's begin with my first guest, Dr. Rachael Piltch-Loeb, a public health expert, advocate, and author of the upcoming book, The Millennial Caregiver. She's candidly sharing her personal experience as a caregiver in her 30s, and her voice has become a relatable and honest presence for a generation navigating burnout, identity shifts, and the reality of caring for others while trying to care for themselves. And here, Rachael Piltch-Loeb, welcome to the Chundria Show. How are you today?
I'm wonderful. Thank you so much for having me. How are you doing?
I'm great, thank you. Well, let's
Good.
dive on in today. Now, you've spoken really openly about being a caregiver in your 30s. I'm curious, in meeting you, how did that role reshape your identity personally and professionally?
Yeah, I think it's so hard to now imagine life having not had that experience. I became a caregiver both for my children, my first child, right around the time that I turned 30, and for my aging and declining father, who was in his late 50s and diagnosed with early onset Alzheimer's. And that kind of parallel experience of seeing one person ail and one person come into the world and grow has really shaped my perspective just on many things. I think personally, it's taught me to be patient, to recognize that time is a thief, and to kind of savor the time a little bit more when you have it with people you care about and love. To think about time management and how we structure our days to make sure we can incorporate all of our priorities a little bit effectively, to really try and build on that prioritization in terms of what's important, not only in how we spend our time, but in what I want to achieve and who I want to be a part of it. And I think professionally, it's also made me take a step back and think, what is it that's meaningful to me as I pursue my career advancement and as I try and make the best of what is kind of a limited window of being able to pursue things that we care about. So it's really shaped, I think, my view on my own development and on how I interact with other people, because I think caregiving is such a life-changing experience for so many.
And I can relate wholeheartedly to, caring for aging parents or even grandparents, that a lot of people step up to the plate to do. And I know it can be a difficult experience, but how can we find joy even in those times in caregiving?
Yeah, it's a great question, and I think it's critical. We have to be able to kind of hold joy and sorrow in our heart and in our mind at the same time, because caregiving doesn't happen in a vacuum. You can watch your child's first steps and then have to take a phone call where your parent has taken a fall and needs to go to the hospital, and the parallels may not be that exact, but I think the point is that life is continuing to happen, and while decline is happening also. And so I think it's important to kind of make space for both of those emotions. And people process emotions differently. For some, they want to talk about it. For some, they want to internalize. But I think it's critical that we allow ourselves to be happy or to have happy moments, even when there is this overwhelming sense of something happening in the background. One, for our own mental sanity, but two, because that's life, right? It's not all one or the other. It's shades of gray in terms of how things evolve. And I think for me, it took some time to kind of allow that joy to happen, and to not feel guilty about it. I think occasionally, we have guilt that that good things are happening or that we're having fun when somebody we care about is not doing well. But if we're lucky enough to have people we love and people who love us, they want us to feel that joy and see that development happen if they were well. And so I think it's important to let go of some of that guilt and allow both of those feelings to coexist.
Sure. Now, caregiving is really interesting because there's no rule book for it, right? Well, not yet.
Not
Now
yet.
there is, but there's no rule book. There's no prep for it. You know, when you're 10 years old, nobody's like, one day this is how you're going to have to take care of me. Like those conversations aren't generally had, and so, I'd like you to explain like any misconceptions you think are out there about caregiving, the burnout that's associated with, especially for younger adults. And maybe like you're forming your career, you're in a new relationship, you just got married, you were a young mother. So it's like one chapter of your life is really propelling, while the other one, it's like sometimes you have, like you said, that need to stop, that need to pivot, that need to be in two places at one time, the need to watch your baby's first steps, and then the need to turn around and go check on your father. And so it's like, do you think there are any misconceptions about caregiving and burnout? Or do we make assumptions that that's what's associated with that experience?
Yeah, I think as you mentioned, there really isn't a rule book, or I found it was really hard to just. One of the things I always like to tell people is I think expectation management is critical, and that's true in so many things in our life, right? You kind of want to get a sense of what you're getting yourself into before you pursue something. It's like, oh, I want to be I don't know, I want to be in marketing because I know what marketing looks like. I want to be a doctor because I go to the doctor, I see what they do. I think very few people are like, I want to be a caregiver or I'm ready to be a caregiver because I understand what that looks like. Because there really is no playbook and it's really hard to figure out what to expect. In part, that's because it looks different for many different people. In part, that's because we don't talk about it because it's not super glamorous and sexy and cool. It's really can be draining and overwhelming and challenging. And in part, it's because our kind of system of healthcare and of caring for people as they age is not set up to support caregivers, family caregivers, unpaid caregivers, or just long-term care in general. So I think we kind of have a big gap in knowing or having a sense of what caregiving looks like from a pretty young age. And I think some of the misconceptions around that have to do with you know you see a movie and you have like the nice, cute, crotchety grandma in the corner who's chiming in and, she's forgetting things. She has her dentures, but she's sort of there and present and she can just be kind of managed in her rocking chair. And it's like that caricature does, people who are ailing or aging a disservice, and it does caregivers a disservice because that then sets up our norm like, oh, somebody who is aging and maybe living at home, they can just, they're just chilling there. And that's not reality. Like they have a lot of needs. And I think, and somebody has to address them. And if they're living at home with you, then that falls on whomever they're living with or the family unit. That also care becomes expensive, even if it's, not medical care. It's all this stuff that, to make sure that they're safe. It's the time that you are spending on caregiving that maybe you're not spending on working outside of the home. And so I think, we don't get a great understanding of what caregiving looks like in the outside world from anything we see kind of in the media or unless we've experienced it ourselves. And that experience can sometimes then be hard to talk about. So I think the misconceptions have a lot to do with the amount of work and the amount of moving parts that go into caregiving. And what I've tried to do when I was having this experience is really try and think about what all those moving parts look like and try and talk with folks about what they experience, what helped them, because I didn't get a good sense going into it of what this experience was going to look like. And there was so much that really took me by surprise and was hard to expect during the caregiving journey.
So was this experience what motivated you to write your new book? Was it the inspiration behind it, or was this a long time passion project for you?
Yeah, 100%. I think that when I this was my experience with caregiving, in watching my siblings and my mom be part of that caregiving experience, and really like our whole extended network, was the impetus to trying to create a resource, especially for younger adults, around what it means to be a caregiver, especially at a younger age in this kind of day and time. Because we do have a lot of resources that are available to us, online, or through technology, and through the evolving healthcare system, but they're extremely hard to navigate. They're really disconnected, and there wasn't a great kind of piece of information out there when I went to Dr. Google, or was kind of going about, searching, that really seemed to, one, be targeted to this age group that has all these competing priorities. And two, really made sense of both the big picture, like what does a horizon of caregiving look like, short term, long term, long term, right? Depending on how long somebody is coping with being ill. And then some of the nuts and bolts of like, how do you navigate some of those really hard conversations with the person who maybe has received this diagnosis, and with other family members who are likely part of the conversation. So I was seeking that. When I spoke with other folks who are in a similar position to me, they were seeking that too, and that was the impetus to creating this book.
Thank you so much. Now, I know you have a great background in public health. Did that influence the way you navigated caregiving and writing this book?
Yeah, so I'm trained as a public health professional. I have a PhD in public health, and really focused on, in part, on communication and social and behavioral sciences. And I would say that skill set, learned research skills and how to ask questions and try and kind of get answers from a lot of folks and make sense of that information. And so I think that I recognize, one, how much our health and well-being are intricately tied to so much in our environment and our interpersonal relationships, and how communication around these health topics is critical, right? You can have all of the stuff out there in the world, but if you can't articulate what your needs are, if you can't figure out how to make it work for yourself and for those around you, it's really hard to act upon whatever resources may be available to you. So I would say topically, and then skills wise, thinking about how do we make sense of these caregiving experiences? How do we talk to people? I did dozens and dozens of interviews with people who had been caregivers, or who supported caregivers. And how do we make sense of that information and put it into kind of big buckets that can then create this resource? So I tried to apply those skills and that background knowledge in creating this book, because there is so much beyond the healthcare system that is critical to caregiving, and so much that's left out of what, say, health insurance may cover if somebody is ill, and I think it's critical to try and bring in all those different pieces of our society, that, social work, long-term care, nursing homes, hospice, occupational and physical therapists, financial planners, legal services, that are relevant and come up when we're trying to think about caregiving. So it was a total labor of love and application of this background that I feel like really helped support this resource coming into being.
Well, congrats on your PhD, all your incredible
Yeah.
work. And I feel like this topic is always going to be timely. Like whether it's 100 years ago
Unfortunately.
or 100 years from now, it's always going to be timely. What advice do you have for others who may feel invisible or overwhelmed while caring for someone else?
I've been there. I think one of the hardest things about caregiving is that when you're in the thick of it, it is so hard to talk about. I think, and that can be for a few different reasons. I'll say for me, I found it painful to try and articulate what I was experiencing, and I felt like I was almost betraying the person that I was supporting by sharing things that were not necessarily positive about what was happening during their decline, because it's out of their control, but it's also part of my experience. And so navigating kind of that feeling of how do you speak with others to support your own coping, but also let go of some of the shame and guilt you feel that you can't control what's happening to the person that you're caring for. And those were just my own emotions. I think people have many different emotions during the caregiving experience, but I found it really hard to talk about. I also felt like when people asked, how's it going? It's like, do you really want to know how it's going? You know, because it takes a lot to unpack. And I think unless you've been in that situation, it's really can be overwhelming to articulate.
What a powerful conversation with Dr. Piltch-Loeb. Her honesty and vulnerability really set the tone for what it means to show up for others while not losing yourself in the process. Up next is Dr. Shari Andrews, a clinical psychologist and transformational coach who helps women reconnect with their emotional wellness and lead with intention. He's also the author of Find Your Pulse, and her work centers around presence, power, and releasing perfectionism, something many of us grapple with. Well, Dr. Shari Andrews, welcome to the Chundria Show. How are you today?
I am blessed, extremely blessed. Thank you.
All right, well, let's get started. My first question for you is, what led to your work helping women embrace emotional wellness and self-leadership?
I think, like most, it comes from personal experience. Basically, knowing what I've gone through, the struggle behind the scenes, inspired me to want to inspire others, but also for the well-being of others. As a physician, that's been my life's mantra, is not only to educate, but to make sure that we're caring for others as well in the most genuine way. So I would say that that was the driving factor and driving force.
Sure. Now, you speak often about the power of presence. What does that look like in your everyday life?
Presence, what more can you offer is what I would say. It's basically you have to own and have that personal invitation to be who you actually are. And once I realized, when I began to be open and honest and not shameful, is when I realized that the real work began. So, I discussed this idea of the hourglass, and the hourglass, as we know in the way it's shaped, it's childhood, where we are in the middle, and then as we are when we are older. And as a child, you're free-spirited. You don't care what anyone thinks. You'll want to go to the grocery store with a tiara on. And you don't care because you don't think anyone's watching, and it's what you want to do. It's a genuine presence, right? But then when we become in our middle part of the years, it's when shame comes in and we start to wonder and worry what others feel. And I'm here to see if we can shatter that middle portion of the hourglass. Because when you get older, what happens again? You don't care anymore. It's like, I've lived and I've done it all. And what do I have to lose? But really, we should live in that power and presence right now. What do we have to lose? Yeah.
You said a word, you said shame. Sometimes we live in that shame, So how can women begin to release that need for perfection as they pursue their own healing, if you're on a healing journey?
I mean, I grew up in a Caribbean household, and the way my mom especially would say, it's like, don't tell everybody your business, you sort of keep things to yourself, or keep it within the household. But honestly, shame to me was me not feeling open and able enough to feel like I was enough, to feel like I could be open and honest with those around me, feeling like maybe I'm too much. Maybe saying to myself that, if I were really strong, then I wouldn't feel the way that I do. And I feel like that in and of itself can hold us down in many, many ways. And so when I let go of shame and I started telling the truth and realizing that it's not only releasing me and releasing the weight that I have on my shoulders, but it's allowing others to exhale, that vulnerability is what invites others to do the same. And that's empowering. So I certainly have made that sort of my new mission, is to be vulnerable, to have others be seen, and for others to sort of exhale, let it out.
Sure. I know you're a medical doctor, but two questions. What's your specialty, and when did you develop a deep affinity for empowering women?
So my specialty is emergency medicine. So I can work in an emergency department, urgent care. I can do private practice, but I live in the ER. So we handle everything that comes through the door, and literally that could be everything. So it's like, a Jane of all trades, if you will, within medicine.
When did you develop the affinity to empower women?
Yeah, I think it's when I became a mom. And then I realized the struggles that I was going through. There were many, many good times, but there were times when I literally would sit by myself at night and feel I would say depressed. I was high functioning, but sad. And I felt like maybe there was more. And once I realized that, when I began to open up about that, is when, again, like, when you start to become vulnerable and you see the true responses of other women behind, like, coming at you, like, wow, I feel the same way. And because you spoke, I felt like I was open to do that. I got to let go of that ego, not the ego of arrogance, but the ego of protection. Me trying to smile harder, work longer, and do more. And I think that's the moment, the pivoting moment is when I became a mom, and I found myself in the situation that I was in as a single mom. And once I became open about that, I realized that helps other women to be seen, me being open about my lived experiences. And that's truly when it all began.
You said you were high functioning. You had a high functioning sadness, which I think a lot of people can relate to because we just go through the motions sometimes. Like you're carrying the burden, you're carrying the weight, you're carrying the responsibility. And especially for someone in your profession, you're carrying the weight of the world every time you clock in and out of the work. You don't know what's going to come through the door. And that's really admirable that you chose that as a profession. Just medicine and, generally speaking, but then that you use your life's work to also empower and encourage women. Do you feel like when you were high functioning, although you had that sadness, did it challenge your identity at all?
Absolutely. It made me really question, like, what am I doing? I literally found myself in a rut, like a very mundane lifestyle, home and work, mom and work, like just going home to my child, figuring it out there, and then getting off to work. And that's not how my life was before that. Before that, I was into car racing and modeling and doing fashion shows. And I was even part of a TV show on a small network that was local to Brooklyn. I could have listed so many things that I would have done. People knew, like, Shari for being outside, and I'm an introverted type of person. But once I took on these two new roles that were pretty much at the same time, becoming a new doctor and becoming a new mom, literally within 6 weeks of each other, is when I realized that things sort of just came to a screeching halt. And that was the moment that basically that cycle that I was in, that vortex that I was in, me realizing I needed to come out of that. And yes, I was functioning well as a resident. I was doing my very best. Yes, as a mom, I was doing my very best as well. And I kudos to myself, because with my support system, I was able to pull through that. But again, when those times came where I sat at home to myself, I began to realize, like, yes, I'm going through the motions, but is this really who I want to be? Am I really embodying all the things that I know I'm capable of? And that's when I began to do a little bit more of soul searching. I found God, I found fitness, I found fashion. And then things started to be born again. I got into fashion so much that I started a fashion boutique. I started to write and blog about commonly seen healthcare things, just delivering information in teeny doses to the community. I founded a fitness platform where not only was I enjoying fitness for myself, but bringing that fitness, wellness, and health to others. And then now with a new book my debut book called Find Your Pulse, is sort of like encompassing all of those things. And now I feel like my cup is filling, it's no longer that vortex that I was in, but now it's me being so open and honest that I'm seeing how much it's helping others. It's now like a drug, and I just want to keep delivering. A good one, though, a good drug.
When you were writing that book, what did you hope the takeaway would be for your readers? Or was it kind of therapeutic for you to write, to get that out, and then now this is like your gift to the world? Or did you have intent in mind for your reader?
It was both. And not only was it cathartic to just write, it was also reflective. It made me sit back and not only retell my story, but I could now reanalyze it. And that's the power of journaling. If we journal, we understand that. But what I hope women would take away from my story is that you can pivot without apology, that you're allowed to evolve, and that burnout isn't a badge of honor. It's actually a warning sign. So your wellness matters. It's important to stop and really think and identify where you're lacking and what you can work on to bring the most fulfillment to you in that time. We always talk about balance because we're always wearing so many hats, but it's not really balance. It's a rhythm. It's giving the attention to the thing that fills your cup the most in that moment. Not ignoring anything else, but sort of taking things in waves as it comes, because we cannot do it all at once.
You said something really important to me. You said that you had to tap back into who you used to be or what you used to enjoy as you were kind of on this, the day in, the day out. You go to work, you take care of your kid, kind of living for the weekend. I don't even know, do you have weekends, but like you're living for your time off, your work, work home back and forth, but I love that you reflected and said, let me get back to the things that I used to enjoy, and I think that that's an experience a lot more. I would love to see a lot more women and a lot more people in general just tap back into the things that you enjoyed or the things that could break up your week or your weekend, or so you're not pausing or holding off on joy. Don't delay your joy. Do the things that make you excited. It's funny because I just had a conversation with my mom and I was like, I remember taking piano lessons when I was like 12, and I remember like wanting to play piano and asking. I got a keyboard when I was like 12, and I'm like, man, what if I would have like kept up with that, as a kid? I've did it for about 2 years. But it made me think, like, I wonder if I could get back in the habit of that. I wonder if I could do that as so can you speak to how tapping back into the things you once enjoyed could help rebuild your emotional resilience?
Yeah, I'm glad you actually had that conversation and that you even put it out into the world as something that you could possibly get back into. I had a similar conversation with a coworker. She's a nurse, and she said, Shari, I was reading your book. It followed me into the bathroom. I just couldn't put it down. But it really had me coming to thinking, like, what can I do? Like, am I really happy being a nurse? And not that I'm not happy being a nurse, but what can I tap back into that belongs to me, right? So outside of your career. And so we got to talking and I'm like, well, tell me about the things you enjoyed before. And biking was one of those things. And so I encouraged her, get back into that, because not only will you get back into biking, but maybe you'll find a community in that. Maybe you'll join forces with someone else who likes biking. Maybe you'll have a friend who bikes with you, and then that friend turns into bringing into another friend. And then you have now a whole fleet of bikers. So I feel like, or cyclists, I should say, but it's important that we tap into the things that we love. I'm not saying it's going to turn into a big business. I'm not saying it's going to turn into a huge community, but it's going to breathe life into you. It's going to actually improve one of the vital signs of life, which is your oxygen. It's going to help get you back to feeling like yourself again. And when you start getting back into piano lessons, it's going to remind you, it's going to be sort of reminiscent of how you felt as a little girl at 12 when you used to play or used to learn how to play. And that to me is profound.
I'd like to say thank you again to my incredible guests, Dr. Rachael Piltch-Loeb and Dr. Shari Andrews. And thank you for tuning in to the Chundria Brownlow Show.
Come with me, I'm headed down the right path. I feel so brave, my head held high and I'm showing class. Dreams ignited, every day I truly give my best. I'm thriving excitedly to be the very best version of myself. I'm so bold and I'm so brave.